The crack of a rifle shot tore through the midnight stillness. Gabriel Harlan bolted upright in bed, his heart hammering against his ribs. For a moment, he couldn't tell if the gunshot had been real or just another nightmare bleeding into wakefulness. The line between dreams and reality had grown thin these past 8 months. Another sound, the frantic whinny of his stallion, confirmed the danger was real. Gabriel reached for his Winchester, the cold metal familiar in his calloused hands. His bare feet hit the rough wooden floor as he moved through the darkness with practiced silence, a skill honed during years as a frontier scout. The moon hung full and heavy over the Arizona desert, bathing the ranch in silver light. Gabriel's shadow stretched long across the porch as he edged toward the corner of the house, rifle raised. His eyes, adjusted to the darkness, caught movement near the corral. A figure crouched by the fence, working at the gate. "That's far enough," Gabriel called, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. The horse, his father's prized Appaloosa, was the last thing of value that he had left. The figure froze, then bolted toward the tree line. Gabriel fired a warning shot into the air. The sound cracked across the empty landscape, echoing off distant mesas. The intruder faltered, but kept running. Gabriel took aim again, not to kill, but to stop. He squeezed the trigger, and the rifle kicked against his shoulder. The figure stumbled, regained balance, and disappeared into the darkness of the mesquite trees. In the stillness that followed, Gabriel approached the corral cautiously. The Appaloosa snorted nervously, tossing its head. "Easy, boy," Gabriel murmured, running a hand along the horse's neck. "They're gone now." A dark stain on the ground caught his eye. Blood, not much, but enough to know his shot had found its mark. Gabriel crouched, touching the warm droplets with his fingertips. A cold weight settled in his stomach. Had he killed someone? The thought should have troubled him more than it did. He scanned the tree line, but the night revealed nothing. Whoever it was had vanished, wounded but alive, he hoped. Another problem to add to the long list that had become his life. Gabriel didn't sleep the rest of the night. He sat on the porch with his rifle across his knees, watching the darkness, thinking about how quickly a man could pull a trigger and how long he had to live with the consequences. Dawn broke over the Superstition Mountains, painting the rugged landscape in shades of amber and gold. Gabriel stood at the edge of his property, following the trail of blood droplets that disappeared into the desert scrub. The trail ended abruptly at a wash where the rocky ground told no tales. He ran a hand over the stubble on his jaw, wondering which band of Apache it might have been. Relations had been tense since the army established a new outpost 20 miles north. Not that Gabriel blamed them. He'd seen firsthand how promises to the tribes turned to dust in the desert wind. The Harlan Ranch sat in a precarious position, too far from town for comfort, too close to Apache territory for most white settlers' liking. But Joseph Harlan had never been one to follow convention, and his son had inherited that stubborn streak. Gabriel's gaze traveled over the modest spread, a small but sturdy house, a barn that leaned slightly to the west, a vegetable garden struggling against the Arizona heat, and empty pastures that should have held cattle. Before the fever took Joseph 8 months ago, the ranch had been on its way to becoming something. Now it was just Gabriel, the Appaloosa, and too many empty spaces. He turned back toward the house, his thoughts dark as the coffee he needed to brew. The morning chores wouldn't wait, regardless of how the night had gone. That was the one mercy of ranch life. It didn't leave much time for thinking. 3 days passed without incident. Gabriel repaired the corral gate, reinforcing it with iron he'd been saving for other projects. He kept the Winchester close and slept lightly, but no more nighttime visitors appeared. On the 4th day, while checking his storage shed, he noticed something was wrong. The heavy padlock hung open, though he was certain he'd secured it the night before. Inside, he found evidence of theft, a sack of cornmeal missing, along with dried beef and a small pouch of coffee beans. Not a substantial loss, but significant for a man living on dwindling supplies. Gabriel cursed under his breath. He'd have to make another trip to Prescott, a journey he'd been avoiding. The town held too many staring eyes and whispered conversations that fell silent when he approached. He was securing the lock when he heard it, a subtle shift in the air, the feeling of being watched that no frontier man could ignore and live long. Gabriel turned slowly, hand dropping to the revolver on his hip. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by the shadow of a juniper tree. Not trying to hide, just watching. It was a woman. Tall, taller than most women he'd encountered, with long black hair pulled back in a thick braid. Her clothing was leather, well worn but carefully maintained. A bow and quiver of arrows hung across her back. Her skin, copper dark in the afternoon sun, marked her as Apache. Gabriel's hand remained on his pistol, but he didn't draw. Their eyes met across the distance, hers dark, nearly black, and revealing nothing. There was no fear in her stance, only a calculating assessment that told him she was deciding whether he posed a threat. With a jolt of recognition, Gabriel spotted a bandage on her upper arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. The horse thief. She had to be. She made no move to flee or attack. Instead, she deliberately turned away from him and walked to his storage shed. Not running, not asking permission, just taking what she needed as if he wasn't standing there armed and watching. Wait. The word came out rougher than he intended. She froze, then slowly turned her head to look at him over her shoulder. One eyebrow raised in question, or challenge, he couldn't tell which. Gabriel lowered his hand from his weapon, a decision he couldn't fully explain, even to himself. "You don't have to steal it," he said, his voice quiet in the still afternoon air. She studied him, suspicion evident in the tightness around her eyes. She didn't trust him. Gabriel couldn't blame her. He stepped back, giving her space. "Take what you need." For a long moment, she stared at him. Then, without a word, she grabbed a small sack of cornmeal, slung it over her shoulder, and walked past him. She moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to the wilderness, each step placed with deliberate precision. As she passed, Gabriel caught her scent, sage and smoke, and something earthier. He saw the fine scar along her jawline, the proud set of her shoulders. She didn't thank him, didn't look back, just walked toward the tree line where the wilderness began, her stride long and purposeful. Gabriel watched until she disappeared into the shadows between the cottonwoods, puzzled by his own actions. He should have confronted her about the attempted theft of his horse, should have, at minimum, demanded some explanation. Instead, he'd given her food freely, as if compelled by something he couldn't name. That night, as he sat at his father's desk writing in the journal he kept hidden beneath a loose floorboard, Gabriel tried to make sense of it. The Apache woman had awakened something in him. Not desire, though she was striking in her wild beauty. No, it was recognition. In her eyes, he'd seen the same hollow ache that greeted him each morning in the mirror. Loneliness recognized loneliness, it seemed, even across the chasm of different worlds. 3 more days passed. Gabriel found himself checking the tree line more often than necessary, looking for a tall silhouette that didn't appear. He told himself it was vigilance, not disappointment. On the 4th day, while repairing the eastern fence line, he felt it, that prickling sensation at the back of his neck. He was being watched. Gabriel didn't turn immediately. He continued driving the wooden post into the hard ground with steady strikes of the mallet, each impact sending vibrations up his arms. Sweat ran down his back, despite the cool morning air. He gave no indication he knew of her presence. After nearly an hour of this pretense, he couldn't maintain it any longer. He turned. She stood at the edge of the tree line, perhaps 30 paces away. Not hiding, just watching. The morning sun caught the sheen of her black hair, and even from this distance, he could see the intensity in her gaze. She wasn't looking at him the way someone looks at a threat. She was studying him, like a puzzle she was trying to solve. Their eyes locked, neither moved. The air between them felt charged, heavy with something Gabriel didn't have words for. His mouth went dry. His pulse quickened in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. She tilted her head slightly, and the corner of her mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, more like she had discovered something amusing. Then she turned and disappeared back into the forest. Gabriel stood there, hammer hanging loose in his grip, his breath coming faster than it should. What was she doing? Why come back just to watch? The questions circled in his mind for the remainder of the day, distracting him from tasks that required his full attention. The next morning, she was there again, this time closer. She sat on a fallen log just beyond his property line, arms crossed, watching him work on the corral gate. She made no attempt to hide, no pretense of secrecy, just sat there as bold as sunrise. Gabriel tried to ignore her. He lasted perhaps 10 minutes before his curiosity won. He set down his tools and walked toward her, each step feeling heavier than it should. She didn't move, didn't react, just watched him approach with those dark, unreadable eyes. He stopped at the property line, an invisible boundary neither of them had crossed yet. Up close, he could see details he had missed before. The way her leather clothing was worn but well maintained, the slight calluses on her fingers, the way she held herself like a coiled spring, ready to explode into motion at any moment. "Why do you keep coming back?" His voice came out rougher than intended. She didn't answer right away, just looked at him with that same measuring gaze. When she finally spoke, her English was accented but clear. "You are not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Violence, cruelty, the things white men usually offer." She stood, and Gabriel realized again how tall she was. Her eyes were almost level with his, forcing him to look straight at her, not down. "But you gave me food. You let me go." Gabriel swallowed hard. The question felt like a trap, though he didn't know how. "You looked like you needed it more than I did." Something shifted in her expression, not softening exactly, but the hard edges seemed to blur slightly. "You live alone." It wasn't a question, but Gabriel nodded anyway. "So do I." She said it like a confession, like admitting to some kind of weakness she wasn't used to acknowledging. The silence stretched between them, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was weighted with things neither of them knew how to say. Gabriel could smell sage on her again, mixed with leather and something earthier. Could see the rise and fall of her chest as she breathed. Could feel the heat radiating off her skin despite the cool air. "My name is Gabriel, Gabriel Harlan." She studied him for another long moment, as if deciding whether his name was worth a knowing. "Neva." The name settled between them like a stone dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward. She turned to leave but looked back at him before disappearing into the trees. And in that glance, Gabriel saw something that made his stomach tighten with a mixture of fear and anticipation. She would be back tomorrow, and he wouldn't be able to stop thinking about her until she was. Neva came back the next day at noon when the sun was highest and the shadows shortest. But this time she didn't stay at the tree line. This time she walked straight across his property, past the corral, past the supply shed, right up to where Gabriel sat on the porch steps eating a piece of dried beef and stale bread. Gabriel froze, the bread halfway to his mouth. His heart hammered so hard he thought she might hear it. Neva stopped 3 feet away, close enough that he had to tilt his head back to look on her, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. "You are afraid of me," she said. Not a question, an observation. "I'm not." He stopped. Lying seemed pointless. "Maybe a little." "Good. Fear keeps you alive." She sat down beside him on the step, close enough that her shoulder almost touched his. Almost. The nearness made his skin prickle with awareness. "But that is not why your hands shake when I am near." Heat flooded Gabriel's face. He set the bread down, suddenly having no appetite. "I don't know what you mean." "Yes, you do." She turned to look at him fully, and the directness in her gaze stripped away every defense he might have tried to build. "You watch me the way a starving man watches food, the way a man in the desert watches water." Gabriel's throat closed. He wanted to deny it, wanted to stand up and walk away, wanted to do anything except sit there, under the weight of her attention. But his body wouldn't cooperate. Neva leaned closer, her breath warm against his cheek. "I have not lain with a man in 6 months, not since my husband died." "Do you know what 6 months of wanting feels like, Gabriel Harlan?" The world narrowed to just the two of them, just the heat of her body next to his, just the low rasp of her voice speaking words that set fire to every nerve he had. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, tried again. "I wouldn't know." She pulled back slightly, studying his face. Something like understanding dawned in her eyes. Then something else, something that might have been hunger. "You have never been with a woman." It wasn't a question, but shame burned through him anyway. At 26 he should have done a lot of things, but living out here alone, no town for miles, no neighbors, no one but him and the run and the silence. No, he admitted, the word barely a whisper. Neva's hand came up, fingers tracing the line of his jaw with a touch so light it might have been imagined, except his skin burned everywhere she touched. That is not something to be ashamed of. Then why do I feel like it is? Because you think it makes you less. Her thumb brushed across his lower lip, and his breath caught. But maybe it makes you more. Before he could ask what she meant, before he could process the feeling of her hands on his skin, she stood abruptly. Her whole body went tense, head turning toward the eastern trees. Gabriel saw it then, what she had heard before him. Movement in the forest. Not one person, several. They are looking for me, Neva said, her voice gone flat and cold. The woman who had been touching his face was gone, replaced by the warrior he had first seen near his supply shed. Her hand went to the knife at her belt. Who? My people. I have been gone too long. She looked down at him, and for the first time he saw something like regret in her eyes. They will not understand why I am here. They will not understand you. 3 men emerged from the tree line, Apache warriors, weapons ready, faces hard with suspicion. They saw Neva standing over Gabriel, saw him sitting at her feet. The lead warrior's eyes narrowed, and he barked something in their language that Gabriel didn't understand but felt in his gut like a punch. Neva answered in the same language, her voice sharp and defiant. The warrior took a step forward, hand tightening on his bow. The other 2 fanned out, surrounding them. Gabriel stood slowly, hands visible and empty. His mind raced through options, none of them good. These men could kill him without breaking a sweat, could burn his ranch and ride away before anyone knew what happened. And Neva, standing between him and them, looked like she was weighing whether to fight or run. The lead warrior spoke again, and this time Neva's shoulders tensed. Whatever he said, it wasn't a request. It was a command. She turned to look at Gabriel one last time. In that look was everything they hadn't said, everything that had been building between them over these few short days, and something else, something that looked like a promise. Then she walked toward her people, and Gabriel's hands clenched into fists at his sides, every instinct screaming at him to stop her, even though he knew it would mean his death. The warriors closed around her, one gripping her upper arm in a way that made Gabriel's jaw clench. They disappeared into the trees, taking with them the only person who had made him feel something other than numb in longer than he cared to remember. Gabriel stood in his yard long after they were gone, staring at the place where she had vanished, wondering if he would ever see her again and why the thought of never seeing her hurt so much when he barely knew her. That night, he pulled the journal from its hiding place and wrote until his hand cramped, trying to capture the essence of Neva on paper. The proud tilt of her chin, the way she moved like water over stones, the unexpected gentleness of her touch against his face. When he finally slept, he dreamed of dark eyes watching him from the shadows. And for the first time in months, his dreams weren't haunted by the ghosts of those he had lost. 2 nights later, Gabriel woke to the sound of something hitting his window. A pebble, then another. He grabbed his rifle and moved to the glass, heart pounding. In the moonlight, he saw her. Neva stood in his yard, face bruised along one cheekbone, breathing hard. She gestured urgently toward the house. Gabriel didn't think, just ran downstairs and threw open the door. She pushed past him, scanning the darkness behind her. They are coming, not far behind. What happened? I refused to marry the man they chose for me, said I would choose my own path. She touched the bruise on her face without flinching. My brother did this, said I dishonor our family, dishonor my dead husband's memory. Gabriel heard it then, voices in the distance. The warriors were tracking her, the cellar under the kitchen. He grabbed her arm, pulling her toward the small door in the floor. It's hidden under the rug. She hesitated, eyes meeting his. In them, he saw something he hadn't seen before. Vulnerability. Trust. She nodded and let him lead her down into the darkness. The space was tight, barely tall enough to stand in, lined with preserved goods and stores for winter. Gabriel climbed down after her and pulled the door shut above them, throwing the rug back in place. Darkness swallowed them whole. He could hear her breathing, fast and shallow, feel the heat of her body in the confined space. They were standing so close that when he shifted his weight, his chest brushed against her shoulder. They will search the house, she whispered, her breath warm against his neck. If they find us like this, then we die. Footsteps above, heavy boots crossing his floor. Gabriel's hand found Neva's in the dark, and she gripped it hard enough to hurt. Her other hand pressed against his chest, and he knew she could feel his heart hammering against her palm. Voices overhead, angry, searching, the sound of furniture being moved, glass breaking. They were tearing his house apart. Neva's fingers curled into his shirt, her body tense against his. In the pitch black, every other sense heightened. The sage smell of her hair, the warmth of her skin, the way her breath hitched when his thumb moved across her knuckles without him meaning it to. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The warriors moved through every room, came close to the kitchen twice. Gabriel held his breath each time, feeling Neva do the same. Their bodies pressed closer in the confined space, and even with the danger above them, even with death so close, he was acutely aware of every point where they touched. Finally, the footsteps retreated, voices faded, silence settled like dust, but neither of them moved. Neva's forehead rested against his collarbone now, her breathing steadier, but still fast. His free hand had somehow found her waist, fingers splayed against the leather of her clothing. Gabriel, her voice was barely audible. What you said before about never being with a woman, not the best time for that conversation. Even as he said it, his body betrayed him, responding to her nearness. There may not be another time. She lifted her head, and even in the darkness, he could feel the intensity of her gaze. They will not stop looking for me. If they find me with you, they will kill us both. Then why did you come here? The answer came not in words, but in action. Her lips found his in the darkness, and every thought in his head scattered like leaves in wind. She kissed him with a hunger that took his breath away, her hands moving to his face, his neck, his shoulders. He responded instinctively, pulling her closer, tasting desperation and desire on her lips. When she pulled back, they were both breathing hard. That is why, she said, because in 6 months of grief and rage and loneliness, you are the only thing that has made me feel alive again. I don't know what I'm doing, he admitted, voice rough. Neither do I anymore. Her fingers traced his jaw in the darkness. But I know I cannot go back to my people. And I know I cannot stop thinking about you. Above them, the house was silent. The warriors were gone, but neither of them moved to leave the cellar. Not yet. Because in this small, dark space, pressed together with danger all around, something had shifted between them that could not be undone. Neva stayed. For 3 days she stayed, and Gabriel's quiet world became something else entirely, something charged and alive and terrifying in its intensity. She worked alongside him without being asked, helped him repair the fence the warriors had damaged, hauled water from the well, moved with an efficiency that spoke of hard-earned survival skills. And every moment they spent together, the air between them grew heavier with unspoken things. On the second morning, they were in the barn tending to his 2 horses, the Appaloosa and an older mare he used for plowing. Gabriel reached for the bridle at the same moment Neva did, and their hands collided. Both froze. The touch lasted maybe 2 seconds before they pulled away, but his skin burned where her fingers had brushed his. Sorry, he muttered, not meeting her eyes. Do not apologize for touching me. Her voice carried an edge that made him look up. She was watching him with that direct gaze that stripped away pretense. Unless you do not want to. That's not... He stopped, unsure how to finish. She stepped closer, close enough that he could see the pulse beating at her throat. You are afraid of wanting me. Because I don't know how to want someone like this. The admission came out raw and honest. Everything I know about you tells me you're dangerous, that I should send you away. But every time I try to think about you leaving, I can't breathe right. Something softened in her expression. She reached up and touched his face, fingers gentle against his cheek. You think I am not afraid? I am terrified. Her voice dropped to nearly a whisper. 6 months ago, I buried the man I thought I would grow old with. Swore I would never let anyone close again. And then you appear with your soft hands and softer heart, and I cannot stop myself from wanting things I have no right to want. What things? Instead of answering, she kissed him. Slower this time than in the cellar. Less desperate, more deliberate, learning the shape of his mouth, the taste of him. His hands found her waist, pulling her closer, and she made a sound low in her throat that sent heat through his entire body. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, she rested her forehead against his. I want that. Want to feel something other than grief. Want to remember what it is to be touched with gentleness instead of duty. And I want, he trailed off, suddenly shy despite having just kissed her. Say it. I want to know what it feels like to be with someone, to not be alone anymore. His hands tightened on her waist. But more than that, I want it to be you, not just anyone. You. Neva pulled back enough to look at him fully. You make it very hard to keep my walls up, Gabriel Harlan. Good. He surprised himself with the word, with the confidence behind it. Because you've already torn down all of mine. That evening they sat on his porch as the sun set, shoulders touching, hands intertwined. Neither spoke much, didn't need to. The silence was comfortable, filled with the sound of crickets and the occasional call of a nightbird. Tell me about him, Gabriel said finally. Your husband. Neva was quiet for a long moment. His name was Dakota, strong hunter, good man. Her voice was steady, but Gabriel felt the tension in her shoulder against his. He died defending our camp from raiders. Bled out in my arms while I could do nothing but watch. Her grip on his hand tightened. The tribe expects me to honor his memory by marrying his brother, producing sons to carry on his bloodline, as if I am property to be transferred. You're not property. No, I am not. She turned to look at him. That is why I will not go back, even if it means being hunted. Even if it means... She stopped, head snapping toward the eastern trees. Gabriel saw it too, a thin line of smoke rising against the darkening sky, not from a campfire, from multiple torches. They have brought more warriors, Neva said, voice gone flat. They are not searching anymore. They are coming to take me by force. Gabriel stood, his heart sinking. How many? Too many. She rose beside him, hand going to the knife at her belt. They will not leave without me. And if you stand in their way, they will kill you without hesitation. The torches were moving closer, a line of fire cutting through the growing darkness, coming straight for his ranch, coming for her. And Gabriel knew that in the next few minutes, he would have to make a choice that would alter the course of his life forever. 7 warriors emerged from the darkness, torches casting harsh shadows across their faces. The lead warrior, taller than the others with a distinctive scar across his right cheek, stepped forward. His eyes found Neva, then moved to Gabriel with open contempt. He spoke in Apache, his voice carrying across the yard. Neva answered, stepping in front of Gabriel. Her hand stayed on her knife, but she didn't draw it. The warrior barked something else, gesturing sharply at her, then at the forest behind him. What's he saying? Gabriel asked quietly. That I have shamed my family, that I have dishonored Dakota's memory by refusing his brother. Her voice was steady, but Gabriel could see the tension in her shoulders. He says, if I do not come willingly, they will burn this place to the ground with you inside. The warrior spoke again, and this time Gabriel caught one word repeated, a name. He says my brother-in-law is waiting, says Dakota's brother has the right to claim me as his wife, that this is not negotiable. Gabriel looked at the 7 armed warriors, looked at the torches, looked at Neva standing rigid beside him, caught between 2 worlds. Every instinct he had screamed that he should step back, let her go, save himself. He was just one man against 7 trained fighters. He had no chance. But when he opened his mouth, different words came out. No, the single syllable cut through the night. The warriors shifted, hands moving to weapons. Neva turned to look at him, eyes wide with something that might have been fear or hope or both. Gabriel, you cannot. I said no. He stepped forward, placing himself between her and the warriors. His hands were shaking, but his voice was steady. She stays here because she wants to. Not because I'm forcing her, not because you're forcing her, because she chose to. The lead warrior's expression darkened. He said something sharp, taking a step forward. The other warriors followed his lead, forming a semicircle around the porch. He says you are a fool, Neva translated, her hand gripping the back of his shirt. One white man cannot stand against Apache warriors. Says your death will mean nothing. Maybe. Gabriel's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst. But if dying means she gets to choose her own life, then I'll die. Because that's what decent men do. They stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Even when they're terrified, even when they know they'll lose. Neva made a sound behind him, something between a gasp and a sob. Her hand tightened on his shirt. The lead warrior studied Gabriel for a long moment. Then he spoke again, but this time his tone was different. Less angry, almost curious. He asked a question. He wants to know why you would die for a woman who is not yours, Neva whispered. Gabriel didn't hesitate. Tell him she is mine and I'm hers. Tell him we choose each other. When Neva translated, something shifted in the warrior's stances. The lead warrior's eyes moved between Gabriel and Neva, seeing something there that made him pause. He spoke at length, his voice hard but no longer threatening violence. He says, Neva's voice caught. He says, if I choose to stay with you, I can never return. I will be dead to my people. My name will not be spoken. My family will mourn me as if I died. The choice hung in the air like smoke. Gabriel could feel the weight of it pressing down on them both. He wanted to tell her to stay, wanted to beg her not to leave. But this had to be her decision. Not his, not her brother's, not her tribe's. Hers. Neva was silent for what felt like an eternity. Then she stepped up beside Gabriel, her hand finding his and gripping it tight. She looked at the lead warrior and spoke in Apache, her voice clear and strong. The warrior's expression hardened. He responded sharply, but Neva cut him off with more words. The two of them went back and forth, voices rising. Finally, the warrior spat something that sounded like a curse and turned away. The other warriors followed, torches disappearing back into the forest. But before the lead warrior vanished completely, he looked back one last time. Not at Neva, at Gabriel. And in that look was something that might have been respect. They stood in the yard long after the torches disappeared, hands still clasped, neither speaking. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on them both. Neva had chosen exile, had chosen him over everything she had ever known. You did not have to do that, she said finally, her voice rough. Stand in front of me like that. You could have died. I know. Then why? Gabriel turned to face her fully. In the moonlight, he could see tears tracking down her cheeks. The first time he had seen her cry. Because 8 months ago, I buried my father and thought I would spend the rest of my life alone. Thought that was just what my life would be. Empty, quiet, safe. He reached up and brushed away one of her tears with his thumb. And then you showed up and made me feel things I didn't know I could feel. Made me want things I didn't know how to want. And I realized that safety isn't living. It's just existing. Neva closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. I have given up everything for this. For you. I know. He swallowed hard. And I'll spend every day making sure you never regret it. She opened her eyes, and the vulnerability he saw there took his breath away. This strong, fierce woman who had faced down warriors and refused to bend was looking at him like he was the only solid thing in a world that had just shifted beneath her feet. Take me inside, she whispered. His heart kicked hard against his ribs. Neva, I need to feel something real, something good. I need... She stopped, swallowing hard. I need you. Later, in the quiet darkness of his bedroom, Neva's head rested on Gabriel's chest, her breathing slow and even. His hand moved gently up and down her spine, tracing the curve of her back. The memory of their bodies joining still hummed through him, a sweet ache unlike anything he had known before. You were wrong earlier, she said quietly. About what? When you said I gave up everything. She lifted her head to look at him. I gave up a life where I had no voice, no choice, but what I found here is worth more. Her eyes, dark and sure in the dim light, held his. I found freedom. I found a man who sees me as an equal, not a burden or a prize. Gabriel's throat tightened with emotion. I found the same thing. He took her hand, brought it to his lips. You saved me, you know. I was just existing, waiting for life to happen to me. And then you crashed into my world and made me realize that life only happens if you're brave enough to reach for it. She settled back against his chest. We saved each other. In the silence that followed, Gabriel felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The weight that had pressed on his chest since his father's death seemed lighter. Not gone, he doubted it would ever be gone completely, but manageable now. Shared. Neva's breathing deepened, and he knew she had fallen asleep. Gabriel stayed awake, watching moonlight filter through the window, painting silver patterns across her skin. For the first time in months, he wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. The next few weeks passed in a blur of shared work and stolen moments. Neva moved through the property with growing confidence, teaching Gabriel Apache techniques for tracking game and finding water. He showed her the intricacies of the ranch, how to mend fences, how to tend the horses, how to cultivate the struggling garden. At night, they explored each other with increasing boldness, learning the landscape of each other's bodies by touch and taste. Gabriel discovered the scar on her thigh from a childhood fall, the sensitive spot behind her ear that made her gasp when he kissed it. She mapped the calluses on his hands, the faint marks across his back from a long-ago whipping at school. But it wasn't just physical intimacy that bound them. They talked about the stars, about their childhoods, about their dreams. Gabriel told her about growing up with a father who was both loving and demanding, who taught him everything from how to track a deer to how to read Shakespeare. She told him about her mother who died when she was young, about learning healing from the tribal medicine woman, about her brief time with the missionary who taught her English before her father sent him away. There were moments when the cultural divide between them seemed impossibly wide, when she couldn't understand his need for written words, or when he was baffled by her spiritual connection to the land. But they found ways to bridge these gaps, creating a shared language of compromise and respect. One afternoon, while Gabriel was hunting, Neva cleaned the small cabin. In the process, she discovered the loose floorboard beneath his father's desk and the journal hidden there. Her fingers hesitated over the leather-bound book. Among her people, a person's private thoughts were sacred, not to be violated. But curiosity and a desire to know the man she was falling in love with more deeply won out. She sat cross-legged on the floor and opened the journal, her fingers tracing the neat, careful handwriting. The early entries were mundane, records of ranch work, notes about the weather, observations about neighboring properties. But after the date of Joseph Harlan's death, the entries changed. April 15th, 1875. I buried father today. The fever took him in the night. Dr. Willigby says there was nothing more to be done, but I know better. If I had gone for help sooner, if I had recognized the signs, the responsibility is mine. I am alone now, truly alone. Neva's heart ached as she read, feeling Gabriel's grief and guilt flowing from the page. She turned to a more recent entry, June 2nd, 1875. The dreams continue, always the same. Father reaching for me, mouth open but no words coming out. I try to reach him, but my arms won't move. Then the scene shifts, and I'm back in that Apache village, watching as the cavalry rides through. The screaming, the bodies, the child looking at me with such accusation before a soldier's bullet finds her. I wake drenched in sweat, the taste of ashes in my mouth. Will I ever be free of these ghosts? Neva froze, rereading the passage. An Apache village? A massacre? Gabriel had never mentioned such a thing. Had he been part of an attack on her people? The thought sent a cold chill through her. She flipped forward, looking for more information, and found it in an entry from just weeks before they met. July 10th, 1875. 5 years today since I left the Scouts. 5 years since I watched Captain Reynolds order the slaughter of women and children and did nothing to stop it. I told myself I was just following orders, that my oath to the army mattered more than basic human decency. I was a coward. I stood by while innocents died. The Apache have every right to hate me, to hate all white men. Their blood is on my hands as surely as if I had pulled the trigger myself. Neva's hands trembled as she read. This was a piece of Gabriel she hadn't seen. A darkness, a guilt that went beyond personal loss. She had sensed that he carried a burden, but hadn't realized its nature or depth. The most recent entry was from just days ago. August 8th, 1875. Neva sleeps beside me as I write this. I watch her breathe and wonder what I've done to deserve this second chance. I am not a good man. My hands are stained with the blood of her people. If she knew the truth, would she still look at me with those eyes that see straight through to my soul? I want to tell her everything, but I'm afraid. Afraid that once she knows what I was part of, she'll see me for what I truly am. Not the man she believes in, but but a coward who stood by while evil was done in the name of progress. The sound of the front door opening made Neva quickly close the journal and replace it beneath the floorboard. She stood, her mind racing with what she had discovered. Gabriel entered, a brace of rabbits in hand, his face lighting up when he saw her, unaware that everything had changed. "Good hunting," she said, forcing a smile. "Got lucky," he replied, setting the rabbits on the table. "Thought we could make a stew." He came to her, pulled her into an embrace that she returned stiffly. He noticed immediately, pulling back to look at her face. "What's wrong?" Neva met his eyes, searching for the right words. She should confront him about what she had read, should demand to know which village, which attack. But fear stopped her, fear that the answer would destroy the fragile happiness they had built. "Nothing," she lied, "just tired." Gabriel studied her face, clearly not convinced, but he nodded and let it go. For the rest of the day, a tension hummed between them, unspoken questions and unshared truths, creating distance where there had been none before. That night, as they lay in bed, Gabriel finally broke the silence. "Whatever it is, Neva, you can tell me." She turned to face him in the darkness, her heart pounding. This was the moment to ask, to bring the ghost into the light. But another thought stopped her. Wasn't she keeping her own secrets? Hadn't she chosen to come to his ranch that first day for reasons beyond simple hunger? "I am thinking about my family," she said instead. It wasn't a complete lie, wondering if they truly mourn me as dead, or if they are angry. If my father sits by the fire and speaks of me as a daughter who betrayed her people. Gabriel reached for her, pulling her against his chest. "I'm sorry, I can't imagine how hard that must be." His genuine concern made her guilt sharper. She should tell him that she knew about his past, should confess her own secrets. But fear kept her silent, fear that the truth would shatter what they had built. Instead, she kissed him, using her body to bridge the gap her words could not cross. He responded eagerly, and for a time they lost themselves in each other, pushing away the shadows that threatened their newfound happiness. But as Gabriel drifted to sleep beside her, Neva remained awake, watching the rise and fall of his chest, wondering how long they could continue building their life on foundations of half-truths and unspoken fears. The next day, while chopping wood behind the house, Gabriel spotted a cloud of dust on the horizon, riders approaching from the direction of town. He set down the axe and went inside where Neva was mending one of his shirts. "Someone's coming," he said, reaching for his rifle. "Might be nothing, but best if you stay inside." Neva nodded, understanding the danger. A woman living openly with a man she wasn't married to would cause talk enough. An Apache woman living with a white man would bring scrutiny neither of them wanted. Gabriel stepped onto the porch as three riders approached. Two men in dusty trail clothes and a woman in a proper riding habit. He recognized one of the men as Thomas Bell, owner of the general store in Prescott. The others were strangers to him. "Afternoon," Gabriel shouted, keeping his tone neutral. His rifle remained visible but not aimed. The riders stopped a respectful distance from the house. Bell raised a hand in greeting. "Harlan, been a while since we've seen you in town." "Been busy with the ranch." Bell nodded, then gestured to his companions. "This here's Mrs. Eleanor Woodward and her brother James Finch. They're looking at property in the area." The woman, early 30s with a composed face framed by auburn hair, inclined her head politely. "Mr. Harlan, we apologize for the intrusion." "No intrusion," Gabriel replied, though he remained wary. Visitors were rare and seldom brought good news. "Mrs. Woodward's husband passed last year," Bell explained. "Left her a tidy sum. She's looking to invest in ranch land." Gabriel tensed, immediately understanding the purpose of this visit. "My ranch isn't for sale." The brother, Finch, spoke up, his voice carrying the cultivated tones of an Easterner. "We haven't even made an offer yet, Mr. Harlan. Doesn't matter what the offer is. This land isn't for sale." Bell shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Maybe we could come in, have some water, talk about it proper-like?" Gabriel hesitated, acutely aware of Neva inside the house. If these people saw her, word would spread through Prescott within days. "Now's not a good time. I appreciate you riding out, but I'm not interested in selling." Mrs. Woodward studied him with shrewd eyes. "They say your father left you with considerable debt, Mr. Harlan. That the bank in Prescott holds notes coming due by winter." Gabriel's jaw tightened. It was true, Joseph Harlan had borrowed heavily to expand the ranch before his final illness, and those loans would need to be repaid soon. My finances aren't your concern, ma'am. They could be, she replied smoothly. I'm prepared to offer a fair price, enough to clear your debts and give you a fresh start elsewhere. I appreciate the offer, but this land has been in my family for 15 years. I'm not leaving. Finch leaned forward in his saddle, his expression hardening. You might want to reconsider. This is excellent grazing land, and my sister is being generous. The bank might not be so accommodating when those notes come due. The implicit threat wasn't lost on Gabriel. Before he could respond, the door opened behind him, and Neva stepped onto the porch. All three visitors stared, shock evident on their faces. Neva stood tall and proud, her expression revealing nothing. Is there a problem? She asked, her accented English hanging in the sudden silence. Belle's mouth opened and closed without sound. Mrs. Woodward's eyebrows rose nearly to her hairline. Finch's face darkened with something like disgust. No problem, Gabriel said, moving slightly to position himself between Neva and the visitors. These folks were just leaving. I see, Mrs. Woodward said, her gaze moving between Gabriel and Neva with new understanding. Well, Mr. Harlan, should you change your mind about selling, our offer remains open until the end of the month. She turned her horse, clearly eager to leave. Finch lingered, his eyes fixed on Neva with naked contempt. You ought to be ashamed, he said to Gabriel, consorting with savages. Have you no respect for yourself or decent society? Gabriel's hand tightened on his rifle. You're on my land, sir. I suggest you choose your next words carefully. Finch's face flushed with anger, but Belle grabbed his arm. James, let's go. Now. With a final glare, Finch turned his horse and followed the others. Gabriel watched until they were well down the road before turning to Neva. You shouldn't have come out. They were threatening you. It wasn't a threat I couldn't handle. I will not hide in your house like a secret shame, she said, her voice sharp with sudden anger. I am not something to be hidden away. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, frustration mounting. It's not about shame. It's about safety. People around here, they don't understand. They'll talk, and talk leads to trouble. So I am to be your secret, something you enjoy in private but do not acknowledge in public? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean? Gabriel struggled to find the right words. I meant that the world out there isn't ready for what we have, that people will try to hurt us, hurt you because of it. I am not afraid of people's words or looks. It's not just words, Neva. These are dangerous times. The Army's pushing all Apache onto reservations. Vigilante groups are hunting down any native they find off-reservation land. If word spreads about you being here, you think I do not know the dangers? Her voice rose. I have lived with them my entire life, but I will not hide. Not anymore. Not even for you. She turned and walked back into the house, leaving Gabriel on the porch, torn between admiration for her courage and fear for her safety. The visitors had complicated things. Word would spread through Prescott like wildfire. Gabriel Harlan living in sin with an Apache woman. The scandal would reach the territorial officials, maybe even the Army. He looked toward the horizon where the riders had disappeared, a sense of foreboding settling over him. The peaceful isolation they had enjoyed was coming to an end. The world was intruding, and he didn't know if what they had built was strong enough to withstand it. That night, the tension between them lingered. Neva prepared dinner in silence, her movements sharp with suppressed anger. Gabriel tried several times to engage her in conversation, but her responses were clipped, minimal. As they ate, he finally broke the stalemate. I'm not ashamed of you. Neva looked up from her plate, her expression guarded. I need you to know that, he continued. What I feel for you, it's not something I want to hide, but this world we live in, it's cruel to people who don't fit into its neat categories. She set down her fork. Among my people, a warrior stands proudly with the one they have chosen. They do not cower in fear of what others might think. Is that why you ran away from your tribe? Because you stood so proudly against their traditions? The words came out harsher than he intended. Neva's eyes flashed with hurt, then anger. That was different. Was it? You left because they wanted to force you into a life you didn't choose. I'm trying to protect us from a world that might try to do the same. By hiding me away? By pretending I do not exist when others are present? By being careful until we figure out how to navigate this? Gabriel pushed back from the table, stood, and paced to the window. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of fire. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. I've spent my whole life in this territory, he said more quietly. I've seen what happens to couples like us. The best we can hope for is being ostracized. The worst, he shook his head. I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me. Neva was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice had lost its edge. Among Apache, when a warrior takes a wife from another tribe, there is often mistrust at first, sometimes even violence. But if the warrior stands firm, if he shows he will protect what is his, eventually there is acceptance. She rose and came to stand beside him at the window. I do not expect your people to welcome me with open arms. I expect them to fear me, to hate me even. But I cannot live in shadows, Gabriel. I cannot be less than what I am. He turned to face her, saw the determination in her eyes. And what are you? To me, I mean. Her expression softened slightly. I am the woman who has chosen you, who has given up her people, her past, everything she knew to be with you. What am I to you? Gabriel reached for her hand, entwined his fingers with hers. Everything, he said simply. You're everything. The anger drained from her face, replaced by a vulnerability that made his chest ache. Then do not ask me to be invisible. Stand with me, as I stand with you. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against him. I'm scared, he admitted into her hair. Not of what people will say or do to me. I'm scared of failing you, of not being strong enough to protect what we're building here. She leaned back to look at his face. You are stronger than you know, Gabriel Harlan. Her hand came up to touch his cheek. But there is something you are not telling me, something that weighs on your soul like a stone. Gabriel tensed. Had she found his journal? Did she know about his past with the scouts? What do you mean? Neva's eyes searched his, and he had the uncomfortable feeling she could see straight through to his darkest secrets. You cry out in your sleep sometimes. Names I do not know, places I have never heard of. And always, always, you beg forgiveness. His heart pounded against his ribs. This was the moment to tell her about the village, about standing by while innocents were slaughtered. But fear locked the words in his throat. If he told her everything, would she still look at him with those eyes that saw the man he could be, not just the man he had been? We all have ghosts, he said finally, the words inadequate even to his own ears. Yes, she agreed softly, but some ghosts do not rest until we face them. She stepped away from him, the space between them suddenly vast despite the few feet that separated them. When you are ready to tell me your truth, I will listen. Until then, we are building our life on sand, not stone. She turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving Gabriel alone with the fading light and the weight of his unspoken confession. Later, as they lay side by side in bed, not touching, Gabriel stared at the ceiling and wondered how he had come to this place, so close to happiness, yet still held back by the chains of his past. Beside him, Neva's breathing told him she was awake too, waiting for words he couldn't yet bring himself to say. The silence between them felt like a living thing, growing stronger with each unspoken truth. 3 days later, as they worked side by side in the garden, the sound of approaching horses brought them both to alert attention. Gabriel squinted against the sun, counting 5 riders approaching from the east, from the direction of the army outpost. Get inside, he told Neva, his voice tight with urgency. This time she didn't argue. Whatever disagreements lay between them, they both recognized the danger represented by soldiers. Gabriel set down his hoe and walked to meet the riders, positioning himself between them and the house. As they drew closer, he recognized the lead rider, Captain James Ward, commanding officer of the outpost. With him were 4 enlisted men, all armed. Mr. Harlan, Ward called as they approached. He was a compact man with a neat mustache and cold eyes. Been a while. Captain, Gabriel nodded, keeping his expression neutral. He had known Ward during his time with the Scouts, knew him to be efficient, ambitious, and utterly without sympathy for the native tribes. The soldiers reined in their horses, forming a loose semicircle before him. Ward studied the ranch with calculating eyes before returning his attention to Gabriel. Hear you've been entertaining visitors recently. The casual tone didn't mask the threat beneath. Gabriel's mouth went dry, but he kept his expression impassive. News travels fast. Small territory. Ward dismounted, handing his reins to one of the soldiers. Mind if we talk? It wasn't a request. Gabriel gestured toward the porch. Can I offer you water? Much obliged. They sat on the porch steps, Gabriel hyper-aware of Neva inside, likely listening to every word. So, Ward said after taking a long drink from the canteen Gabriel offered, word is you've taken up with an Apache woman. There was no point in denying it. What I do on my own property isn't army business, Captain. Ward's eyebrows rose. Ordinarily, I'd agree. Man wants to ruin his reputation, that's his affair. His voice hardened. But when that man is harboring an Apache off the reservation, it becomes my concern. She's not a prisoner. She's here by choice. That's so? Ward handed back the canteen. Well, that's unfortunate, because all Apache in this territory are under orders to relocate to the San Carlos reservation. No exceptions. Gabriel's hand tightened on the canteen. She's not going to San Carlos. Not your decision to make, son. Those are orders direct from the Department of War. She's given up her tribal connections. She lives here now. Ward's expression was almost pitying. You think that matters? An Indian's an Indian to the folks in Washington, and the policy is clear. They all go to the reservation. Gabriel stood, anger rising like bile in his throat. She's not going anywhere. She's under my protection. Ward sighed and stood as well, brushing dust from his uniform trousers. I was afraid you'd take that position. You always were stubborn, Harlan. He looked toward the house. Ma'am, I know you're listening. Best come out now. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened, and Neva stepped onto the porch. She stood tall, her expression a mask of dignity and defiance. Ward studied her with professional detachment. What tribe? Apache, she answered, her voice steady. Aravipa band. Ward's eyes narrowed. Aravipa. He looked back at Gabriel. You know what that means, don't you, Harlan? Given your history. Gabriel's blood ran cold. Of all the Apache bands, the Aravipa had the most reason to hate him. They were the ones who had suffered in the massacre he had witnessed, the event that haunted his dreams. Captain, please, Gabriel said, his voice low. She has nothing to do with that. With what? Neva asked, looking between them. Oh, what does he mean, Gabriel? Ward's eyebrows rose in surprise. You haven't told her? He let out a low whistle. Now that's interesting. Told me what? Neva demanded. Nothing, Gabriel said quickly. It's nothing. Doesn't sound like nothing, Ward observed, clearly enjoying Gabriel's discomfort. Sounds like you've been keeping secrets from the lady. He turned to Neva, his expression falsely sympathetic. Has he told you about his time with the scouts, about what happened at Aravipa Canyon 5 years ago? The color drained from Neva's face. Aravipa Canyon, where her people had been massacred, where women and children had been slaughtered in their sleep by white settlers in their Tohono O'odham allies, one of the darkest chapters in the territory's bloody history. Stop, Gabriel said, his voice raw. This isn't necessary. But Ward continued, his eyes fixed on Neva. Your friend here was a scout for the army back then, was supposed to warn us about the attack. Funny thing though, the warning never came. By the time the army arrived, it was too late. Dozens dead. Neva's eyes found Gabriel's, filled with a dawning horror that cut him to the core. Is this true? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Gabriel couldn't speak, couldn't find words to explain the inexplicable. His silence was answer enough. I'll leave you two to discuss it, Ward said, not bothering to hide his satisfaction at the damage he had caused. We'll be back in 3 days. The woman comes with us to San Carlos, or we'll take her by force. He turned back to his men, then paused and looked over his shoulder. Oh, and Harlan? Harboring an Apache off-reservation is a federal offense. When we return, you'll have a choice, cooperate or face charges. With that final threat, he mounted his horse and led his men away, leaving behind a silence so complete Gabriel could hear the blood rushing in his ears. When the soldiers were just specks on the horizon, Neva spoke, her voice unnaturally calm. Aravipa Canyon. She stared at him, her eyes dark with betrayal. You were there. It wasn't a question, but Gabriel answered anyway. Yes. You watched my people die and did nothing. Neva, please, let me explain. Explain what? Her voice rose, sharp with pain. Explain how you stood by while women and children were murdered, while babies were killed in their mother's arms? Gabriel flinched as if struck. I didn't know what was going to happen. By the time you realized it was too late, she spat the words. Just as it was too late for my cousin and her children. Too late for my uncle and the elders. She took a step back, her body rigid with fury and grief. All this time, all these weeks together, and you said nothing. You held me in your arms, knowing you had helped destroy my family. I didn't help them, Gabriel protested, desperation making his voice shake. I tried to stop it once I knew, but you did not stop it. Neva's control shattered. She slammed her fist against the porch post. You did not warn them. You did not save them. Tears streamed down her face now, the first time Gabriel had seen her truly break. And now I learned that the man I have given everything to, my body, my trust, my future, is the same man who helped destroy my past. She turned away, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Gabriel reached for her, but she recoiled from his touch as if it burned her. Don't. The single word held a lifetime of pain. Do not touch me. Not now, maybe not ever again. She walked into the house, closing the door behind her with a quiet finality that terrified Gabriel more than if she had slammed it. He stood alone on the porch, the weight of his past pressing down on him with suffocating force. The truth was out now, the secret he had carried for 5 years. The shame that had driven him to isolation, to this remote ranch where he thought he could outrun his ghosts. But ghosts, as Neva had said, did not rest until faced. And now, having finally found something worth living for, he stood to lose it all because he had lacked the courage to confess his darkest truth to the woman he loved. Gabriel sank onto the porch steps, buried his face in his hands, and for the first time since his father's death, wept without restraint. The sun rose and set 3 times, and still they barely spoke. Neva remained in the house, moving through the rooms like a ghost. She cooked, cleaned, maintained the routines they had established, but her eyes never met Gabriel's for more than a fleeting moment. At night, she slept on a blanket by the hearth, refusing to share his bed. The physical distance between them was nothing compared to the emotional chasm that had opened. Gabriel tried several times to explain, to tell her the full story of what had happened at Aravaipa Canyon, but she would raise a hand to stop him, turn away, retreat further into herself. Her silence was a wall he couldn't breach. On the morning of the 3rd day, the day Captain Ward would return, Gabriel found Neva sitting on the porch steps, watching the sunrise paint the desert gold. She looked up as he approached, and for the first time since the revelation, she didn't immediately look away. May I join you? He asked, his voice rough from disuse. She nodded, a small gesture but enough to kindle a spark of hope in his chest. He sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. For a long while they simply watched the sun climb higher, feeling the day's heat begin to build. Finally Neva spoke. They will come today. Yes. What will you do? Gabriel took a deep breath. He had spent 3 sleepless nights considering this question. Whatever you want me to do. She turned to look at him, surprise briefly overtaking the sorrow in her eyes. What do you mean? If you want to go to the reservation, though God knows I can't imagine why you would, I won't stop you. If you want to run, to try to make it to Mexico, or find another Apache band that's still free, I'll give you the Appaloosa and supplies. He swallowed hard. And if you want to stay and fight, I'll stand with you. Even if it means facing federal charges. Even if it means worse. Neva studied him, her expression unreadable. You would do this? After what I said to you? I would do this because of what you said to me. Gabriel's voice was steady now, the words he had rehearsed in his mind finally finding voice. You were right, Neva. I should have told you the truth from the beginning. I was a coward 5 years ago at Aravaipa Canyon, and I've been a coward every day since. He looked down at his hands, calloused and sun-darkened. I was assigned as a scout for the Army. My job was to patrol the territory, report on Apache movements. I knew a group of settlers in Tohono O'odham were planning something against the Aravaipa band, but I thought it was just talk. By the time I realized they were serious, they were already moving. The memories he had suppressed for so long came flooding back. The frantic ride through the night, trying to reach the army outpost in time, knowing with every passing hour that more lives would be lost. I rode for the outpost, tried to get the army to intervene. But Ward, he delayed, said he needed proper authorization. By the time we arrived, it was over. The massacre had been carried out. Gabriel's voice caught. I saw what they did. I saw the bodies. Children, elders, women. I couldn't process it. That human beings could do that to other human beings. He looked up at Neva, saw the tears tracking silently down her face. I resigned from the scouts that day. Came back here to the ranch, tried to forget. But you can't forget something like that. It lives in you, changes you. Why did you not tell me? Her voice was barely above a whisper. Because I'm a coward, he repeated. Because I was afraid of losing you. Because I didn't want to see in your eyes what I see now, pain I helped cause, even if by inaction rather than action. He reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. I am so sorry, Neva. Not just for not telling you the truth, but for failing your people when they needed help most. I will carry that shame until the day I die. She was silent for a long time, her hand still in his. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady despite her tears. In our way, there are two kinds of guilt. There is the guilt of the one who takes action to harm, the one who strikes the blow, and there is the guilt of the one who could prevent harm but does not, the one who turns away. Both carry weight, but they are not the same. She pulled her hand from his and stood, walking a few steps away before turning to face him. I have had 3 days to think. 3 days to remember the stories of Aravaipa Canyon, to imagine you there, to hate you for your part in it. She took a deep breath. But I have also had 3 days to remember the man I have come to know. A man who stood between me and 7 armed warriors, who offered his life for my freedom, who has shown me nothing but respect and tenderness. She wiped the tears from her face with a quick, almost angry gesture. These two images, they do not fit together. I cannot make them whole in my mind. They're both me, Gabriel said quietly, the coward and the man trying to be brave, the man who failed your people and the man who would die for you. I'm both, Neva. All I can do now is try to be worthy of your forgiveness, even knowing I don't deserve it. Neva's expression softened slightly. Among my people, when someone has done great wrong, they must make amends, not with words, but with actions, with sacrifice. Tell me what to do, Gabriel said without hesitation. Whatever it is, I'll do it. She looked toward the horizon where dust would soon appear as Ward and his men approached. First, we must survive this day. Then we will speak of amends. Relief washed through Gabriel, not forgiveness, not yet, but a chance, a path forward. What do you want to do about Ward? Neva's expression hardened. I will not go to San Carlos. I would rather die free than live in a cage. Gabriel nodded, having expected nothing less. Then we need a plan. We can't fight the army, not directly, but maybe we can find another way. For the first time in 3 days, a ghost of a smile touched Neva's lips. I have been thinking about this too. She sat back down beside him, closer this time, and began to outline her idea. As Gabriel listened, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Whatever happened when Ward arrived, whatever future lay ahead, they would face it together. The chasm between them was not closed, but a bridge was being built, one careful word at a time. Midday came and went with no sign of the soldiers. Gabriel and Neva worked together, preparing for various possibilities. They packed supplies, food, water, ammunition, and readied the horses. If flight became necessary, they would be prepared. And as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Gabriel spotted the dust cloud that signaled approaching riders. But something was wrong. The cloud was too large for just 5 men. That's more than Ward and his patrol, he said, reaching for his spyglass. Through the lens, he counted at least 15 riders, his stomach twisted with dread. Ward's brought reinforcements. Neva's expression remained calm, but Gabriel saw the tension in her shoulders. That changes things, she said quietly. Yes. Gabriel lowered the spyglass. We can't fight that many. And if we run, they'll catch us before we reach the mountains. They stood side by side watching the approaching force. Their plan, to reason with Ward, to appeal to whatever humanity remained in the man, to offer a compromise, seemed suddenly naive in the face of such overwhelming force. Gabriel, Neva said, her voice steady despite the danger. If they take me, do not fight them. Do not give them reason to kill you. He turned to her, alarmed by the resignation in her tone. I'm not letting them take you. You may have no choice. There's always a choice. Gabriel took her hand, squeezed it tight. We face this together, whatever comes. The riders drew closer, dust billowing behind them. Now Gabriel could make out details, blue uniforms, the glint of rifles in the afternoon sun. He could also see that not all the riders were soldiers. Some were civilians, including two he recognized with a jolt of surprise. James Finch and his sister, Eleanor Woodward. What are they doing here? He muttered. The group reined in about 50 yards from the house, forming an intimidating line across the property. Captain Ward rode forward, accompanied by Finch. They stopped 20 paces from the porch, where Gabriel and Neva stood. Mr. Harlan, Ward called, I see you've had time to consider your situation. Gabriel stepped forward, keeping his voice level. Captain, you've brought quite a force for one woman. Ward's mouth twitched in what might have been amusement. Precautionary. I wasn't sure what kind of reception we'd get. Finch sat rigid in his saddle, his face flushed with what looked like righteous indignation. The savage should be in chains, he said, loud enough for Neva to hear. Living in sin with a white man, it's an abomination. Gabriel's hand moved instinctively toward his sidearm, but Neva's fingers wrapped around his wrist, stopping him. Her touch was a reminder. Violence would only make things worse. Ward ignored Finch's outburst. I'll make this simple, Harlan. The woman comes with us to San Carlos. You can escort her there yourself if you prefer, but she's going. Those are my orders. And if we refuse, Gabriel asked, though he already knew the answer. Ward's expression hardened. Then I'll arrest you for harboring a hostile Indian off-reservation lands, and we'll take her anyway. Your choice. Before Gabriel could respond, Mrs. Woodward rode forward to join Ward and her brother. Mr. Harlan, she said, her tone surprisingly gentle, this doesn't have to end badly. I've spoken with Captain Ward about an alternative arrangement. Gabriel eyed her suspiciously. What game was this woman playing? What arrangement? The reservation is the only legal place for an Apache, Ward interjected. But Mrs. Woodward has suggested a compromise. Mrs. Woodward nodded. I'm still interested in purchasing your ranch, Mr. Harlan. If you were to agree to sell and to leave the territory, the army might be persuaded to look the other way regarding your companion. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. You want my land badly enough to bribe an army officer? Mrs. Woodward's composed expression didn't falter. I prefer to think of it as finding a solution that benefits everyone. You and the woman can start fresh somewhere else, away from the prejudices of this territory. I get the land I want for my cattle operation, and Captain Ward avoids the unpleasantness of a forced removal. And what does your brother get? Gabriel asked, nodding toward Finch, whose expression remained hostile. James will manage the ranch for me, Mrs. Woodward replied smoothly. Once you're gone. Gabriel glanced at Neva, who had been listening intently. Her face revealed nothing, but he could read the tension in her body, the careful way she was holding herself, ready to fight or flee at a moment's notice. We need to discuss this privately, Gabriel said to Ward. The captain nodded. 5 minutes, then I need your answer. Gabriel led Neva into the house, closing the door behind them. As soon as they were alone, she spoke. It is a trap, she said in a low voice. Once you sign the papers, they will take me anyway. I know. Gabriel ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. But it buys us time. If we refuse outright, Ward will arrest me and take you by force. Then we must fight. Against 15 armed men? That's suicide, Neva. She lifted her chin, defiant even in the face of impossible odds. I would rather die fighting than live as a prisoner. Gabriel took her hands in his, looking deeply into her eyes. I'm not letting either of those things happen, but we need to be smart about this. If I agree to their terms, We get a window of opportunity, time to gather supplies, time to plan our escape. They will watch us. They will not let us simply ride away. Not together, no. Gabriel squeezed her hands. But there might be another way. Quickly, he outlined a desperate plan. Neva listened, her expression shifting from skepticism to thoughtful consideration. It is dangerous, she said when he finished. Everything about this situation is dangerous, he replied. But it's our best chance. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. We will try your way. They returned to the porch. The soldiers and civilians waited exactly as they had left them, a line of impatient faces in the afternoon sun. Well, Ward called, what's your decision? Gabriel stepped forward. I'll sell the ranch to Mrs. Woodward, but I have conditions. Ward and the widow exchanged glances. What conditions? Mrs. Woodward asked. First, I want fair market value, enough to buy land elsewhere and start over. Second, I need 2 weeks to get my affairs in order before we leave. And third, I want your word, all of you, that Neva will not be forced onto the reservation if I cooperate. Finch scoffed, but Mrs. Woodward silenced him with a sharp look. The price is negotiable within reason, she said. 2 weeks is acceptable, provided you sign the preliminary agreement today. As for the third condition, she looked to Ward. The captain shifted in his saddle. Officially, all Apache must report to the reservation. But he glanced around as if checking that no one would overhear. I suppose if the woman were to leave the territory with you, it would no longer be my concern. So we have a deal? Gabriel pressed. Mrs. Woodward nodded. We have a deal. I have the preliminary papers with me. We can sign them now and my lawyer in Prescott will draw up the final documents. Let's get it done then, Gabriel said, trying to sound defeated rather than desperate. As Mrs. Woodward dismounted and removed papers from her saddlebag, Ward gestured for most of his men to fall back. They retreated to a respectful distance, though Gabriel noted they remained alert, rifles at the ready. The next hour passed in a blur of legal formalities. Gabriel signed the preliminary agreement, accepting Mrs. Woodward's offer for the ranch, an amount that was indeed fair, perhaps even generous under the circumstances. Ward signed as a witness, as did one of his lieutenants. I'll return in 2 weeks with the final papers and your payment, Mrs. Woodward said, folding the documents carefully into her saddlebag. I trust you'll use the time to make necessary arrangements. Of course, Gabriel replied, maintaining the facade of cooperation. Ward approached, his expression now almost friendly. Smart decision, Harlan. Best for everyone. He lowered his voice. Word of advice, head north. Oregon Territory is more accepting of unusual arrangements. Gabriel nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The patronizing advice made his skin crawl, but he forced himself to appear grateful. As the group prepared to depart, Finch rode close to the porch, leaning down from his saddle to speak to Gabriel in a voice too low for the others to hear. Don't think this is over, he hissed. No white man should lie with an Indian bitch. There are those of us who won't stand for it, even if my sister and the captain are willing to look the other way. Before Gabriel could respond, Finch spurred his horse and rejoined the others. The threat lingered in the air, a reminder that their dangers were not limited to Ward and his soldiers. They stood on the porch, watching as the group rode away, dust settling in their wake. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Gabriel allow his shoulders to slump, the tension of the confrontation draining out of him. They will be watching the ranch, Neva said quietly, waiting to see what we do. Probably, Gabriel agreed, but they'll expect us to wait the full 2 weeks, to pack our belongings, to prepare for a long journey. They won't expect us to move tonight. Neva's eyes widened. Tonight? Is that wise? It's our only chance. Ward bought the story, but Finch didn't. And men like him, they don't wait for legal niceties. If he decides to come back with a few friends to teach us a lesson, we need to be gone. Determination settled over Neva's features. Then we prepare. Now. They moved with quiet efficiency, gathering only what was essential: food, water, ammunition, a few personal items. Gabriel retrieved his savings from a hiding place beneath the floorboards. Not a fortune, but enough to sustain them for some time if used carefully. As Neva packed saddlebags, Gabriel went to his father's desk and removed the journal from its hiding place. He hesitated, then tucked it into his coat. Some ghosts needed to be carried, even in flight. By nightfall, they were ready. 2 horses stood saddled in the barn, the Appaloosa for Gabriel, the mare for Neva. Their plan was desperate but simple. They would travel by night, avoiding the main trails, heading first west toward the mountains, then north through territory too rough for easy pursuit. As full darkness descended, Gabriel stood in the doorway of the house one last time, looking at the simple home his father had built, the place he had thought to spend his life. Now it would pass to strangers, become part of someone else's story. "Are you ready?" Neva asked softly from behind him. He turned to find her dressed for travel, her hair braided tight against her head, a determination in her eyes that matched his own. "Yes," he said, closing the door without locking it. No point in securing what was no longer his. They moved silently to the barn, led the horses out, and mounted. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black velvet sky, the waning moon providing just enough light to see by without making them too visible to watching eyes. Gabriel looked at Neva, her profile outlined in silver by the starlight. Despite everything, the danger, the uncertainty, the unresolved pain between them, he felt a surge of something like joy. They were choosing their path, together. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it side by side. "Let's go," he said softly. They rode away from the ranch at a walk, keeping to the shadows, avoiding any sound that might alert watchers. Only when they were well clear of the property did they urge the horses to a trot, then a canter, putting distance between themselves and the life they were leaving behind. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses. By dawn, they had reached the foothills of the mountains to the west, rugged terrain that would slow pursuers. They made camp in a hidden canyon, where a small spring provided water for them and the horses. As Gabriel built a small, smokeless fire, Neva scouted the area, returning with the news that they appeared to be alone. "No signs of pursuit," she said, settling beside him at the fire. "But they will come, once they realize we have fled." "Yes," Gabriel agreed. "But they'll be looking for a couple traveling together. That's why we need to separate." It was the hardest part of their plan, but the most necessary. 2 travelers were easy to track and identify. Alone, each would attract less attention. "I still do not like this part of your plan," Neva said, her voice tight with concern. "Neither do I," Gabriel admitted, "but it's our best chance. You know these mountains better than I do. You can move through them in ways I can't, find paths that will hide your trail." "And you?" "I'll take the more obvious route, north along the trading paths. If anyone's following, they'll focus on me, the white man they can easily identify. They'll assume you're with me or that I know where you've gone." Neva's expression was troubled. "And if they catch you?" Gabriel's smile was grim. "Then I'll lead them on a merry chase as long as possible, giving you time to get clear." She reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "I did not choose freedom only to lose you towards jail cell." "You won't," Gabriel promised, though he knew it was a promise he might not be able to keep. "We'll meet at the place we discussed, 3 days from now. If one of us doesn't arrive by nightfall of the 3rd day, the other keeps moving north." Neva nodded reluctantly. They had chosen a landmark both knew, a distinctive rock formation near the territorial border, far enough from settlements to be relatively safe, but close enough to a trading post that they could acquire supplies if needed. They rested through the heat of the day, taking turns keeping watch. As sunset approached, the time for parting drew near. Neva would travel by night through the mountains, while Gabriel would leave at dawn, taking a more visible route that would draw any pursuers to him. As they shared a simple meal of jerky and hardtack, Gabriel found himself studying Neva's face in the fading light, memorizing every detail: the proud line of her jaw, the slight scar above her left eyebrow, the depth of her dark eyes. If things went wrong, if this was the last time— "Stop," she said softly, reaching out to touch his cheek. "I see your thoughts in your eyes. Do not think of this as goodbye." Gabriel caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "I'm trying not to, but I can't help thinking about all the things unsaid between us. About Aravipa Canyon, about the future, about us." Neva's expression softened. "There will be time for those words when we meet again. For now, know this. What you did or failed to do 5 years ago, it is part of you. But it is not all of you, the man who stood on that porch facing 7 warriors for my sake, the man who has shown me nothing but respect and tenderness. That man is also you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, Gabriel said, his voice rough with emotion. Forgiveness is not about deserving, she replied. It is about choosing to see beyond the wrong, to find the good that lives alongside it. She leaned forward, rested her forehead against his, in an intimate gesture that spoke of connection deeper than words. I have not forgiven all, not yet, but I have chosen to see all of you, Gabriel Harlan, the darkness and the light, and I have chosen to walk beside you, if you will still have me. Gabriel's throat tightened. After everything, his cowardice, his deception, the revelation of his darkest shame, she was still choosing him. It was more than he had dared to hope for. I don't have the words, he said finally. Just thank you. She smiled, a small but genuine curve of her lips. Words are not needed now. Save them for when we meet again. The sun slipped below the horizon, painting the western sky in shades of crimson and gold. Soon it would be time for Neva to leave, to make her way through the darkness, while Gabriel remained behind. They shared a last meal, a last fire, a last embrace, and when the stars emerged in the night sky, Neva mounted the mare, her silhouette dark against the stars. 3 days, Gabriel said, standing at her stirrup, at the rock formation. 3 days, she confirmed. Be careful, Gabriel Harlan. I have not come so far to lose you now. She leaned down, kissed him once, brief but full of promise, then turned the horse and disappeared into the darkness of the canyon. Gabriel stood watching long after she was gone, the echo of her kiss lingering on his lips, his heart both heavy with separation and light with hope. Dawn found Gabriel already riding north, following a game trail that paralleled the more established trading route. He kept the Appaloosa at a steady pace, conserving the animal's strength for the long journey ahead. His plan was simple but risky: travel openly enough to be seen if anyone was looking, but cautiously enough to avoid capture. He wanted potential pursuers to follow him, to focus their attention on his trail rather than searching for Neva in the mountains. It was a delicate balance, being visible enough to be a decoy, but not so exposed that he'd be easily caught. By mid-morning, Gabriel had covered nearly 15 miles of rough country. He paused at a stream to water the horse and refill his canteen, scanning the horizon behind him. No dust clouds, no sign of pursuit yet, but that didn't mean they weren't coming. He continued north, keeping to the edge of the foothills, where the terrain offered some cover, but still allowed for relatively fast travel. The sun climbed higher, the heat building. Gabriel's thoughts returned constantly to Neva, wondering how far she had traveled, whether she was safe. Around noon, he spotted them, 3 riders in the distance, following his trail. Too far away to identify, but the purposeful way they moved suggested pursuers rather than ordinary travelers. Gabriel urged the Appaloosa to a faster pace, not running openly, but increasing the distance between himself and the followers. The terrain worked in his favor, offering ridges and ravines that allowed him to disappear temporarily from view, only to emerge elsewhere. By late afternoon, the game of cat and mouse had intensified. The pursuers had closed some of the distance, and Gabriel could now make out details. 2 men in civilian clothes and 1 in what might be a uniform. Not a full patrol, then. Starting now. Possibly Finch and some companions, acting without official sanction. As the sun began to set, Gabriel made a decision. Rather than continuing north as his pursuers would expect, he turned east toward a series of box canyons he knew from his scouting days. If he could lead them into the maze-like terrain, he might lose them in the darkness. The gamble nearly worked. As night fell, Gabriel guided the Appaloosa into the narrow entrance of a canyon, following its twisting path by the light of the stars. Behind him, he heard the voices of his pursuers, confused by his change of direction, arguing about which way to go. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Let them waste time searching the wrong canyons. By dawn, he would be miles away. But fate had other plans. As the Appaloosa navigated a particularly narrow section of the canyon, the horse suddenly shied, startled by a rattlesnake coiled on a rock beside the path. The sudden movement sent Gabriel off balance. He tried to regain control, but the horse reared, and Gabriel fell, striking his head against the canyon wall. Pain exploded through his skull. He lay stunned, the world spinning around him. Dimly, he was aware of the Appaloosa bolting, its hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Then darkness claimed him. When Gabriel regained consciousness, the first light of dawn was filtering into the canyon. He sat up slowly, his head throbbing. Blood had dried on the side of his face from a gash near his temple. The Appaloosa was gone, along with the saddlebags containing most of their supplies. Damn, he muttered, taking stock of his situation. He still had his pistol, a knife, the canteen that had been strapped to his belt, and the small pouch of money and the journal in his coat. Everything else, food, ammunition, blankets, was gone with the horse. Worse, he had lost precious time. This was the first of the 3 days. If he couldn't reach the meeting place by the end of the third day, Neva would continue north without him, thinking he had been captured or killed. Gabriel forced himself to his feet, fighting a wave of dizziness. The fall had left him battered, but nothing seemed to be broken. He could travel, albeit slowly. He began walking north, following the canyon until it opened into a broader valley. The sun climbed higher, beating down mercilessly. Without a horse, the journey that should have taken 3 days might now take 5 or more. By midday, thirst and hunger had joined the throbbing pain in his head. Gabriel rationed the water in his canteen, taking small sips to ward off the worst of the desert's effects. He kept moving, driven by the thought of Neva waiting at the meeting place, by the promise of a future together if only he could reach her in time. The day stretched endlessly. Gabriel walked until his legs trembled with fatigue, until his boots raised blisters that broke and bled. When night fell, he collapsed beneath an overhang, too exhausted to continue. He slept fitfully, tormented by dreams of Neva waiting, searching for him, finally leaving with the belief that he had abandoned her or been captured. Dawn of the second day found him stiff and sore but determined. He rose, drank sparingly from his dwindling water supply, and continued north. By mid-morning, a new worry presented itself. The canyon he had been following ended abruptly at a cliff face. To continue north, he would have to climb out of the canyon and travel across open country, making himself visible to any pursuers still searching for him. There was no choice. Gabriel began the arduous climb, finding handholds in the rough stone, pulling himself upward despite the protests of his aching body. At the top, he paused to catch his breath and survey the landscape. Miles of open desert stretched before him, broken only by scattered bog formations and the occasional patch of scrub brush. In the far distance, he could make out the distinctive rock formation that was their meeting place. Still at least a day and a half's journey on foot. Grimly, Gabriel started across the open terrain. The sun beat down, sapping his strength. His water ran out by midday, and the symptoms of dehydration began to set in. Dizziness, confusion, a desperate thirst that seemed to consume his entire being. Still, he kept moving, one foot in front of the other, driven by a determination that transcended physical discomfort. Neva was waiting. He had promised. He would not fail her again. As the second day waned, Gabriel's condition deteriorated. The head wound, exposure, lack of water, all took their toll. He began to hallucinate, seeing water where there was only sand, hearing voices in the whisper of the wind. Once, he thought he saw his father walking beside him, offering encouragement in the same gruff voice he remembered from childhood. Night brought a brief respite from the heat, but no relief from his deteriorating condition. Gabriel collapsed beneath a stunted juniper, his body at the limits of endurance. As consciousness slipped away, his last thought was of Neva, her face, her voice, the feel of her hand in his. He awoke to the sensation of water on his lips. For a moment, he thought it was another hallucination. Then he felt hands supporting his head, lifting him slightly. "Drink slowly," a familiar voice commanded. "Just a little at first." Gabriel's eyes fluttered open. Neva's face swam into focus above him, her expression a mixture of relief and concern. "How?" His voice was a rasp, barely audible. "I followed our plan for 1 day," she said, helping him take another small sip of water. "Then I felt something wrong. I turned back, followed your trail." Gabriel's parched lips curved in a weak smile. "You tracked me. You are not difficult to track," she said, a hint of humor in her voice despite the gravity of the situation. "You leave signs a child could follow." As his senses returned, Gabriel became aware of their surroundings. They were in a small rock shelter, protected from the sun. The mare was tethered nearby, along with, remarkably, the Appaloosa, which Neva must have found and recaptured. "What day is it?" he asked, suddenly remembering their deadline. "The third," she replied. "We can still reach the meeting place by nightfall if you are strong enough to ride." Relief flooded through him. Not too late, not lost. "I can ride," he assured her, though his body protested at the mere thought of movement. Neva's expression grew serious. "What happened? Where are the men who were following you?" Gabriel explained about the fall, the loss of the horse, his desperate journey on foot. "I don't know what happened to the pursuers. They might have given up, or they might still be searching the canyons." Neva nodded, her face thoughtful. "We must move soon, but first you need to regain some strength." She reached for a small pouch at her waist, removed something wrapped in leaves. "Eat this, it will help." The food was some kind of dried meat mixed with berries. A trail food she had prepared, rich in energy. Gabriel ate slowly, feeling strength beginning to return to his depleted body. As he ate, he studied Neva, noting the signs of her own difficult journey. The scratches on her hands from climbing, the weariness around her eyes. Yet she had turned back for him, risking her own safety to find him. "Thank you," he said simply, "for coming back." She met his eyes, and in her gaze was a warmth that filled the empty spaces inside him. "We choose each other," she said softly, echoing his words from days before. "That means we do not abandon each other." By midday, Gabriel was strong enough to ride, though Neva insisted he ride the more docile mare while she took the Appaloosa. They set out toward the meeting place, traveling at a measured pace to conserve the horse's strength and to avoid drawing attention with dust clouds. The landscape changed as they moved north, the stark desert giving way to more varied terrain, with increased vegetation and occasional stands of trees. They avoided the few settlements they passed, keeping to less traveled paths that Neva seemed to know instinctively. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, the distinctive rock formation came into view, a towering spire that local tribes considered sacred, marked with ancient pictographs. They had reached their destination before nightfall, as planned. They made camp in a hidden dell near the base of the formation, where a small spring provided fresh water. As Neva tended the horses, Gabriel gathered wood for a small, carefully concealed fire. The routine tasks felt strangely normal, as if they were simply travelers on a journey rather than fugitives fleeing persecution. When darkness fell, they sat side by side at the fire, sharing a simple meal of jerky and wild onions Neva had gathered. The stars emerged above them, a canopy of light against the infinite darkness. "What happens now?" Neva asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Gabriel considered the question. Their immediate danger had passed, but the future remained uncertain. "We keep moving north," he said, "beyond the territorial boundary. Find a place where people are less concerned about who's with whom." "Is there such a place?" The question held no bitterness, only genuine curiosity. "I believe so." Gabriel took her hand and twined his fingers with hers. Ward mentioned Oregon. There are communities there where a man is judged by his actions, not his associations, where we might find acceptance, or at least tolerance. Neva was silent for a moment, her face thoughtful in the firelight. "And if we do not find this acceptance, what then?" "Then we make our own place," Gabriel said simply. "Find a remote valley, build a cabin, live on our own terms. It wouldn't be an easy life, but we'd be free." She smiled, the first full smile he had seen since the revelation about Aravaipa Canyon. "I did not choose an easy life when I chose you, Gabriel Harlan. I chose a true one." She leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Gabriel put his arm around her, drawing her closer, savoring the solid reality of her presence after the fear of losing her. "There is something I must tell you," she said after a while, her voice soft but clear. "Something I have kept from you as you kept Aravaipa Canyon from me." Gabriel tensed slightly but didn't pull away. "What is it?" Neva straightened, turned to face him directly. "When I first came to your ranch, it was not by chance. I had been watching you for many days before I took food from your storage shed." Gabriel frowned, puzzled. "Why?" "I had heard stories of a white man living alone on the edge of Apache territory. A man who had once been a scout for the Bluecoats, but who left after Aravipa Canyon. I wanted to see this man for myself, to understand why he had abandoned the soldier's path. She looked down at their joined hands. My husband, Dakota, did die defending our camp, as I told you. But what I did not tell you was that he died at Aravipa Canyon. Gabriel's breath caught. The connection he had feared most was real. Neva, She raised a hand, stopping his words. Let me finish. Dakota fought bravely, killed several attackers before he fell. I was not there. I had been sent to gather herbs with other women the day before the attack. When we returned, we found, her voice faltered momentarily, we found what they had left behind. Gabriel's throat tightened with grief and guilt. He had seen the aftermath, the bodies, the destruction. Had Neva been among the women who returned to find their families slaughtered? After, when the survivors gathered, she continued, we heard about the scout who had tried to warn the army, who had resigned his position in protest. Some said it was a lie, a story to mask the army's complicity. But my grandmother, who has the gift of seeing, said it was truth. She looked up, meeting Gabriel's gaze directly. When my husband's brother claimed me as his right, when the tribe insisted I must marry him to honor Dakota's memory, I refused. I was outcast, forced to live on the edge of the tribe's territory. That is when I decided to find this scout, to see for myself what kind of man would stand against his own people for the sake of mine. So when you came to my ranch that first day, I came to judge you, she admitted, to see if the stories were true. If you were a man of conscience, as my grandmother claimed, or merely a coward who ran from his shame, as others said. Gabriel absorbed this revelation, feeling pieces fall into place. Her initial wariness, her careful observation of him, the way she had tested him. And what did you decide? He asked finally. Neva's expression softened. I decided you were both. A man who had failed to act when action was needed, who carried that guilt like a stone, but also a man trying to be better, to find redemption in small acts of decency. She reached up, touched his face gently. I did not plan to stay. I did not plan to feel what I began to feel for you. But when you showed kindness, where you could have shown cruelty, when you offered respect, where others had offered only possession, something changed. Gabriel covered her hand with his own, held it against his cheek. Why didn't you tell me? For the same reason you did not tell me about Aravipa Canyon. Fear. Fear that the truth would destroy what was growing between us. The parallel was undeniable. They had both withheld truths out of fear. Both protected the fragile connection they were building by concealing painful histories. So where does that leave us? Gabriel asked. Both of us keeping secrets. Both of us hiding parts of ourselves? Neva shook her head. No more secrets. No more hiding. From now on we build on truth, however difficult it may be to speak or hear. She shifted closer, her eyes reflecting the firelight. I came to your ranch seeking judgment. I stayed because I found something I had never known before. A man who saw me as a woman, not as property. A man who would stand against his own kind to defend my right to choose. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. I chose you then, Gabriel Harlan. I choose you now, not despite your failures, but with full knowledge of them, as you choose me, knowing all of who I am. Gabriel pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she might vanish. The weight he had carried for so long, the guilt, the shame, the fear, seemed lighter somehow, shared between them. No more secrets, he echoed. No more hiding. They remained by the fire until it burned down to embers, talking of the past they had each concealed, of the future they hoped to build. And when they finally lay down to sleep beneath a vast canopy of stars, it was with a new understanding. That redemption came not from erasing the past, but from facing it together. 3 months later, a small cabin stood in a hidden valley in the Oregon Territory. Built with logs cut from the surrounding forest, its sturdy walls and tight roof promised protection against the coming winter. Smoke curled from the stone chimney, carrying the scent of cooking food into the crisp autumn air. Inside, Gabriel added wood to the fire while Neva stirred a pot of stew. The single room was simply furnished but comfortable. A bed they had built together, a table and chairs traded for with a settler 10 miles downriver. shelves holding the few possessions they had acquired during their journey north. On the wall hung two items of significance: Gabriel's old rifle, now used primarily for hunting, and Neva's bow, a connection to the heritage she carried with her. Side by side, they represented the dual nature of their shared life. "The Wilsons have invited us for the harvest gathering next week," Gabriel said, returning to the table where he had been mending a harness for their horse. Neva looked up from the stew, her expression thoughtful. "Do you think it wise? Not everyone in the settlement is as accepting as the Wilsons." It was a valid concern, though they had found a degree of tolerance in this remote community, certainly more than they would have experienced in Arizona. They were still viewed with suspicion by some. An Apache woman and a white man, living openly as husband and wife, challenged deeply held prejudices. "Thomas Wilson wouldn't have invited us if he thought there would be trouble," Gabriel reasoned. "Besides, we can't hide forever. This is our home now. We have a right to be part of the community." Neva nodded, a small smile touching her lips. "You have changed, Gabriel Harlan. There was a time when you would have preferred to avoid such gatherings." "I've had a good teacher," he replied, returning her smile. "Someone who showed me that living in shadows is not really living at all." He set aside the harness and crossed to where she stood, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "We'll go to the gathering," she decided, leaning back against him, "but I will bring my knife." Gabriel laughed softly, pressing a kiss to the side of her neck. "I would expect nothing less." Outside, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, dusting the valley in white. Inside, the fire crackled, casting golden light across the cabin's interior. Neva turned in Gabriel's arms, her face tilted up to his, her eyes reflecting the same peace he felt in his own heart. They had traveled far these past months, not just in physical distance, but in understanding. The ghosts of Aravipa Canyon would never fully disappear. The pain of choices, made and unmade, would always be part of their shared history. But alongside that pain had grown something stronger, a bond forged in truth, in acceptance of each other's flaws and strengths alike. "What are you thinking?" Neva asked, noting his contemplative expression. Gabriel brushed a strand of hair from her face, a gesture of tenderness that had become familiar and precious. "I'm thinking that 8 months ago I thought my life was over, that all I had left was isolation and regret." His voice was soft with wonder. "I never imagined I could find this. A home, a purpose, a future. You." "We found each other," Neva corrected gently. "Two broken spirits who became stronger together than apart." She was right, as she so often was about the things that mattered most. They had saved each other, healed each other, built something neither could have created alone. Outside, the snow continued to fall, erasing tracks and smoothing rough edges, covering the valley in pristine white. Inside, Gabriel held Neva close, grateful beyond words for second chances, for the courage to face hard truths, for the woman who had seen the worst in him and chosen him anyway. Whatever challenges the future might bring, they would face them together. No longer alone in a hoarding land, but united in a life of their own choosing. A week after the harvest gathering, Mrs. Wilson visited, bringing a beautifully quilted blanket, a gift from the women of the village. "For your winter," she said, her eyes warm as she took in their home. The neighbor children now came regularly, learning archery from Neva and how to read animal tracks from Gabriel. And on the bookshelf, next to Gabriel's old journal, sat a new ledger, where they recorded the combined knowledge of both their cultures, a legacy that someday would be passed on to others who found their way to this valley, seeking healing just as they once had.